Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Ky Dickens, and you're listening to the Telepathy Tapes podcast.
My son said to me, I can hear thoughts.
What is this phenomena happening? Why are his mind and my mind completely connected?
Telepathy is the tip of the iceberg with their spiritual gifts.
People don't understand that they can do this. They don't even have to be in the same room, the same zip code.
For decades, a very specific group of people have been claiming telepathy is happening in their homes and in their classrooms. And nobody has believed them, nobody has listened to them. But on this podcast, we do. Welcome to episode 7 of the Telepathy Tapes. Throughout this series, you've heard parents and teachers say telepathy is just the tip of the iceberg. Today, we're going to explore what they mean by that. But before we dive in, it's essential that you've listened to the previous episodes, and in particular, episode 6, as it's foundational to everything going forward. In that episode, we learn that the reigning scientific paradigm, materialism, fails to explain the origins of consciousness and things like telepathy, precognition, and other psi abilities, despite substantial evidence supporting their existence. A growing number of scientists propose a new paradigm, suggesting that consciousness is the foundation of the universe, predating everything else. If this is true, it opens up an explanation for telepathy, clairvoyance, savant skills, and even the survival of death. Given that non-speakers can communicate telepathically, could they be more attuned to this foundational consciousness? And if so, do they hold the key to validating this new emerging scientific paradigm?
People always say that these kids have disabilities, and it's funny because it's actually us that has the disability. They have these abilities that we don't have, the mind reading and, all the other stuff that comes with that.
This is Maura. She lives near Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and she has a 10-year-old daughter named Amelia. Maura and I both stumbled into this world right around the same time, both by the way of Dr. Diane Powell. She was a mother seeking answers, and I was a filmmaker searching for them too. And we became close due to our shared wide-eyed curiosity. We are both very logical and don't take anything at face value, and we had many conversations early on comparing notes about what we were learning and hearing and what could possibly be true and real. Beyond that, our lives were just kind of in the same place. We both have daughters that were born days apart. We both have families and roots in the Midwest. Maura works in advertising, loves the outdoors, and she's not devout or dogmatic about anything. She's the type of person that makes everyone feel disarmed and comfortable.
What's really hard as a parent is when you get a diagnosis, like Amelia has DDX3X syndrome, and some of the traits are intellectual disabilities, developmental delays, autism is a trait of that, a list of all the things that they're not going to be able to do or all the challenges that they're going to face.
And yet, so often the doctors and schools don't get it right. They assume because a child can't talk or has a difficult time controlling their body that they're not competent. And that is far from true.
With Amelia, she is the opposite of having intellectual disability. She's brilliant. She is very aware. She's very emotionally intelligent. But her body doesn't demonstrate that. Everything that you're seeing falls in line with what you've been told.
Thankfully, Maura and Mike looked beyond the diagnosis and found their daughter. The first time Maura and I met in person, we went to a brewery in Wisconsin, and we ended up outside where it was cold, as far away from everyone else because we were both conscious of how bonkers our conversation would sound to anyone nearby.
When she learned how to type, her whole world really opened up, and that's when we discovered she could read my mind.
Okay, so how so?
She was writing things that were literally what I was thinking. And at some point I said, "Can you hear what mommy's thinking?" And she said, "Yes."
Maura thought what was happening in her home was a singular, rare event. She had no idea this was a common phenomena. And like in many households, she and her husband weren't on the same page about what was happening, at least not in the beginning.
Mike is a little bit more logical, former military, works a lot in spreadsheets, and is practical.
I'm more a person of science than I am of faith, right? And science, you can see it and touch it. So I think at first, I just definitely more skeptical.
It wasn't until other people,
Her teachers at school,
some of her therapists, her babysitter said that they were experiencing the same thing about the telepathy, that it started to become more real.
having other people come out and say it confirms the case, right? More than one data point starts to prove a fact.
I'm Katie. I am Amelia's para when she was in 3rd and 4th grade. I worked with her in the classroom.
So, Katie, when did you realize she could read minds?
She wanted a video one afternoon at school, and then she kept reaching for my computer rather than hers. And I said, "Do you know my password?" And she said, "Yes." And I'm like, "Prove it." And sure enough, she knew my password.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
Yeah. And there'd be times in a busy classroom that I would think of a question for her and she would be able to answer it without me actually talking out loud.
In time, almost everyone working with Amelia became aware of her gifts.
I'm Jody Hertz, and I'm Amelia's treatment therapist, which means I come in and set up programs for her and supervise her other technician. I work with Amelia mostly on her iPad. We found that typing is a much quicker and more efficient way for Amelia to communicate with us. When we first started typing, we had to have our hand completely under her hand so that she felt confident enough that she could do it.
When I visited Amelia's house, her therapist Jody was actually there for her weekly session.
And we tried to back off all the way up to the elbow. She now can do it more independently. So if we're not right here, she could still type.
Amelia, are you able to show me what you do with Jody?
Come here, kiddo. What do you think you could say?
How's your day?
Very good. That would be a great thing to say to somebody.
Amelia has this awesome speaking device where she can type in letters, but there's also buttons to make it easier that have a predictive text type feature. And Amelia can type independently now without being touched.
What would you want your new friend to know about you?
M-Y-N-A-M-E.
She types, "My name is Amelia."
You got it. You could say, my name is Amelia. What's one thing you could tell them?
She typed that she loves music.
You love your music. Great job, Amelia. Thanks for telling me those things. Okay, you can take a break and play.
Amelia has so many toys in her basement, it's like a huge playground, and she was very happy to take a break from her tutoring sessions.
Because she has some motor planning issues as well, it takes a lot of effort for her to be able to type out the words. So she knows in her mind what the letters should be, but it's hard for her to get her hand to do what her mind wants it to do.
We talked for a while, and then I asked what made her initially think that Amelia might be reading her mind.
I asked her questions that she would have no reason to know the answer.
For instance, one Monday, Amelia knew that Jody had an oven fire over the weekend and burnt a cake.
I asked her, I said, "How do you know that?" And she said, "I read your mind." And I was like, "Oh, you read my mind." And so then I would ask her more difficult questions that I knew for sure I didn't just mention in passing or it had literally just happened.
One time, Jody was late to school. And when she got there, she said, "You would not believe the reason why I'm late." And Amelia picked up her talker.
And she typed 3 turkeys.
And sure enough, 3 turkeys had waddled into the road, making Jody late.
She also knows if I look at something and I ask her, "What did I look at?" she'll know things like that too. Again, I can't explain that, but I would say I was definitely not so much a believer to completely convinced this is what she's doing.
And like most non-speakers that I've met, telepathy is just the tip of the iceberg. And in time, Amelia revealed that she knows other things, like she can understand multiple languages.
She wrote in Portuguese. She often writes in Spanish. She, in one sentence, went from Spanish to English to Portuguese.
And how does she say she knows that?
She'll either say God taught her or the gods, plural. And she says that he teaches her at night. Sometimes she will say she was born knowing that. And one time I did ask her, I said, "So you knew it as a baby?" And she said before. So whatever she was referring to.
When Amelia was younger, she used to tell us that she would see the god or the gods at night and she would learn things from them. Recently, I asked her about, different religions and different gods and different things that people believed. And I asked her, do you think that there are multiple gods out there, or is it just one god or one being that everybody has a different name for? And she typed different names.
And again, oftentimes I don't push a lot of that because I don't want to accidentally be steering her one way or another. So whatever she says, I tell her mom, and then her mom will ask more follow-up questions to get more information.
So Jody often gives us updates after their sessions if anything interesting or noteworthy happens. And this one is about the different languages that Amelia speaks.
And to me, this is fascinating because there are actually 3 therapists in the room, Jody, and then 2 that you haven't met, Allie and Sydney.
Allie showed Amelia some Hebrew, and Amelia read it and translated it. So Allie showed her again today, and Amelia typed out what it meant. I said, "But who taught you Hebrew?" And she typed, "The rabbi." Then I asked if there was anything else she could read. She wrote Hiero. I said, hieroglyphics? And she wrote, yes, pictures. So Allie pulled up a few letters and we showed them to Amelia, and she knew what letters they were, written in hieroglyphics. And they were ones that they hadn't looked up the meaning of yet. They just pulled them up and identified them after. Allie asked her if she saw these letters before, if it was the first time, and she wrote first time. I asked her who told her about hieroglyphics, and she said the god told.
I asked Maura if she tried to press any deeper.
She tends to be better at understanding versus speaking languages.
Why do you think that is?
So I had this interesting theory and the whole idea of consciousness. So if her baseline is talking telepathically to people, she is technically translating it into English and having to put words to something that just is.
If there's no language in the realm of fundamental consciousness, which why would there be? Because from my understanding, there's no bodies there. It just is consciousness. Then all communication would be via telepathy.
The way that she talks, the language that she uses is, it's almost like she's translating.
So it's almost then like she can pick up on any language because she's not focused on the words. She's focused on the emotion and the meaning and symbolism behind the words, which then makes sense. You could pick up any language.
I had this conversation with her recently about this. My question to her was, are you actually hearing those words in that language and like able to translate and understand that language, or are you just telepathically understanding that?
Yes. What did she say?
She said that she telepathically could hear them.
The thing that fascinates me about this theory is that so many spellers use language that feels poetic and almost old. Like sometimes it almost feels Shakespearean, and other times it feels like it's from the time of the Torah. And a lot of people that work with spellers, including teachers, talk about this.
They have a way of speaking, a style of speaking that is not of this earth. It's not English grammar.
This is Carrie, the teacher from Pennsylvania that you met in episode 5.
There's a lightness to it. There's often love infused with it. There's wisdom in there always.
The vocabulary and the construct of her sentences is often very different. And so anybody that spends enough time with her recognizes this very quickly.
And for me personally, getting to know each speller is beautiful and fascinating because their personality is wrapped in this wise and ancient language, but their tangible, age-appropriate personality always does shine through. For instance, with Amelia,
she has said quite a few funny things. So again, she always tells me about these God visits, as she calls them, that happen at night. And so I said, did he talk to you again last night? And she said, yes, unfortunately. And then she does ...
And sometimes what Amelia says is laced with heaviness.
Sometimes if she looks tired, I'll ask her, did you sleep okay last night? And she almost always says no. And I'll say, well, why not? And she'll say that she had a God visit. And she will say that she's being told things that are going to happen, and then they actually do happen. She knew that a boy in the South was going to kill children and that he was going to be killed by the police. And she typed that all out completely on her own.
3 days later, the unthinkable, tragic shooting at Robb Elementary School happened. And Amelia had no specific details about exactly where or exactly when or why or who. Only in hindsight does what she was spelling make sense. And yes, this could have been a coincidence, but she typed cryptic warnings days before other tragedies. Imagine how scary and difficult this would be if you were a child, and imagine being parents, not knowing how to protect your child, and not having enough information to prevent or warn others about a possible tragedy. One silver lining during this whole dark time was that at least Amelia's teachers and therapists understood and recognized her gifts, and that what she was writing wasn't a threat from her, but rather she seemed to be passing along information that was coming from somewhere else.
I want to make sure that she is able to communicate and not getting frustrated or sad, and then that she's not overwhelmed with all of this stuff and I don't know how to help her.
So after talking to Amelia's therapist, it sounds like she has precognition, meaning she can predict things. She knows multiple languages that she's never been taught, and she says she travels to a place to learn knowledge. Is all of this part and parcel to tapping into the greater foundation of consciousness that we discussed in episode 6? In order to fully wrap my head around this, I wanted to talk to Susie Miller again. She's the teacher and speech-language pathologist that you met in episode 5, who saw the light body floating above her young student, and who's used tuning forks and fabrics to help integrate non-speakers. Susie has worked with hundreds of non-speakers around the globe.
I like to call them spiritual savants because the skill sets far exceed telepathy. The clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience All of those clairs give this population the ability to experience life and reality in ways that most neurotypical individuals don't even consider possible. The ability to heal, the ability to see into another, telekinesis, the ability to converse with and interact with other realms. All of this is just commonplace for this population.
And yet, despite these gifts that are remarkable, Amelia, just like all the other spellers, is a human being first. She's a 10-year-old girl with the same interests, hopes, dreams, and annoyances of every other kid out there.
She has this very funny personality, and one of the first things that she ever did that made me realize that there was more going on is she was doing her math homework.
And as any parent out there knows, the way they teach math now is super weird and annoying, and it's redundant. And when they get to the end of this long problem, the math book asked,
"How did you get the answer in the previous box?" And Amelia wrote, "I am cool." And she was very proud of herself. And that is Amelia all the way. She's both this very, very wise 10-year-old, but she's also this silly, smart, sarcastic, funny kid.
Other than not being able to speak and not being able to sprint across the yard, there's nothing else different about Amelia. But with being nonverbal, she gets put into a box a lot. And every year when she goes to school, it usually takes almost a semester to get the teachers and the teachers' aides to understand how to communicate with her. And once they connect, a whole world opens up, mostly for the teaching staff. I think it's frustrating for Amelia. You can see it in her face and in her tone that she's not understood.
Not having it easy at school, Mike and Maura really step up to the plate to make sure Mia has some semblance of childhood joy and innocence.
She's fun. She's a good kid. She's very understanding and compassionate and funny. She likes to do a lot of pretending and funny voices.
I've spent time in Amelia's household, and it's full of love and play, but it can get heavy at times, especially when Amelia can see and hear something that her parents cannot.
She talks to people that have passed too, and that's been a big piece of this with her. Early on, there was an instance where she was going to bed and she was terrified in her room, and she begged me to go into our bedroom. So I brought her into our bedroom, and then she was okay for a minute, and then she was terrified again, and she begged me to go downstairs to sleep on the couch, which she had never done before. And she crept down the stairs and peeked around the corner as if she was expecting to see like something there or somebody there to scare her.
Once Amelia started communicating, they were able to ask more questions and learn more about what was going on.
I asked her on a different occasion if we knew any of them, and she said yes. And I was curious. We had lost my sister-in-law not too long ago.
She died of cancer, and her name was Lori.
And I showed her a picture of Lori, one of the most recent pictures that we had. She didn't really look like herself. She was sick and had been going through treatment. And she said, no, that's not it. And then I showed her a picture of Lori when she was healthy. And she was like, that's it. That's who I saw. And was like very, adamant about that's who it was.
This was hard to comprehend, maybe even believe at first for Mike and his sister Trish, because Lori was their sister. But there have been enough strange occurrences, messages about things that Amelia just shouldn't know, that they do believe now that Amelia is communicating with Lori.
I had dinner with my sister last week, and it was closer to Lori's birthday.
So Mike and Trish were having dinner, and they connected with Amelia on FaceTime.
And she said that Lori had visited again and said hi. Trish asked if Lori ever says anything about her, and then it takes Amelia a while to type.
So Amelia got off FaceTime so she could work on typing her response, while Mike and Trish waited for her reply.
And Amelia comes back and says,
on behalf of Lori, who passed away.
Yeah, I gave her a gift in her dreams.
And this turned out to be true.
Trish said, I just had this really vivid dream of Lori the other night, and I forgot what she said, something from their childhood that they were doing.
This feels very specific, especially because Trish noted it had been a long time since she dreamt of Lori. And these types of kind of uncanny knowings that feel far greater than coincidence are being conveyed by Amelia all the time.
I'll take a breath here because I was pretty close with my sister. I think you would have to be ignorant to doubt the fact that some people can touch that space. Most of us can't, and I guess you call it a gift or an ability or whatnot, but sometimes maybe a curse. Amelia's been a little anxious lately. She's having a lot of voices come to her, and it's hard for her to think And she typed the other day, she just wants an hour alone.
What I've learned the past few years is that the spiritual gifts vary among the non-speakers. They all have different ones, and in some people, they're much stronger than others. But seemingly communicating with people who have passed is a very common gift these spiritual savants have. In fact, Maria, the teacher from Illinois that you met in episode 5, her students were talking about spirits before she even discovered the telepathy.
I had a very sudden start of things happening. Not so much the telepathy, but more having to do with spirits that they're seeing.
Maria had been working with spellers, many of them the same ones, for years. And then out of nowhere, they started sharing information about spirits with her, and it snowballed.
I came to work on a Monday, and my student said, "Awesome spirits in the room today." I just went along with him because he has a big imagination and I love it. But I was like, "I don't see them." And he's like, maybe you should turn the light off and maybe you can see them then. So I turned the light off. We're sitting there. I'm like, nope, still can't. I've had several people in my life that have passed. So he went on to list names
Of Maria's family members who had died, but he said were in the room.
listed very specific details of our lives together, who they were, things that we did together. There's no way he would have known. So that was Monday. Tuesday morning, another student said, "Oh, my grandfather's here today," and wanted to talk to him. That was Tuesday. It just kept going. It kept getting more every week, a new student, another week, another new student talking about someone, either in their life or my life that had passed. I thought, am I holding these memories in my subconscious and they're picking it up? Am I somehow thinking and not knowing I'm thinking about these things?
Which, even if that was the case, that's remarkable because that's not telepathy then. That's digging into deep private core memories. And I have yet to be told that anyone can do that. But I do put a big emphasis on yet to be told. Because every time I think I've heard it all or something's impossible, I get verification from a parent or another email or phone call telling me something I've never heard before that seems absolutely out of this world. So anything is possible.
I was kind of numb actually for a couple months, just kind of processing everything that was happening and then trying to keep a balance of, I want to keep the lessons going with them, but at the same time, I feel like they really want to talk about this.
In the last episode, we talked about the dissociative boundary, the quote-unquote shield around our brain that might help block out the mass of information that surrounds us that we can't see. The scientists in that episode questioned whether non-speakers have the same dissociative boundary or this shield, and thus they are dealing with a flood of uninvited knowledge. Some parents have told me that as their kids grow and mature, they can better handle what they choose to let in. So there is a way to stop it, but it also seems as though there's a way to encourage it and start it, and a lot of that has to do with belief. I've heard from scores of parents and teachers that spellers need to be believed and trusted to allow their gifts to shine. If you're open to receiving what they can do and what they might share, there's just more they'll share with you. Belief is important. And again, we all know this because of things like the placebo effect. The placebo effect is real. So there is evidence of efficacy or a strong belief changing what the mind or body is capable of doing. And what's been fascinating, and I'm still trying to understand it and wrap my head around it, is that over the past month, I've heard from spellers who are saying that because this truth is now out there, the belief in them and what they're capable of has risen so dramatically that they're actually able to tap into more. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. But for Amelia, she's feeling it, and she's trying to sort through a bunch of new information suddenly coming to her.
Especially since these telepathy tapes have come out, there's been this influx of people reaching out to her, both non-speakers and people who have passed. She's hearing all these people, non-speakers are coming to her now and have problems or want help. And she's been overwhelmed and has asked me to help her manage that.
And she means that they are reaching out to her telepathically.
There was a day that Amelia was typing from what she said was a non-speaker. She typed, "I'm so lonely, I wish I would die." And Amelia was begging me to help this person. And so I was trying to gather more information because I don't know if they're in my town, across the country, in a different country. I got a name Gerald, and they lived across from a park. But it's a helpless feeling having that information, but not being able to do anything about it. And that's happened a couple of other times where she was really worried about something happening or somebody and tried to get me to help, and I couldn't get enough information.
There is an epidemic of loneliness plaguing so many non-speakers. I've observed different extremes of this isolation, but the most unbearable is for those who never learned to communicate via spelling, who are trapped inside their own bodies, unable to share their thoughts, personalities, or intelligence with the world. The second extreme of loneliness is social isolation, even for those who can communicate via spelling. When I first started to learn about Amelia, it was clear that she was deeply impacted by feeling different and also feeling lonely.
So she wrote this poem and she named it The Smart Horse, which was not what I was expecting her to name it. And it says, "There once was a unicorn. The unicorn looked like a horse. The people thought she was dumb. Then the friend of the unicorn thought she was smart. Then her teachers thought she was smart too. They taught her like she was smart." And I asked her after that, I said, "Well, who's the unicorn?" And she said, "I am." And I said, "Who's the friend of the unicorn?" And she said, "You are." And it just kind of gets you when you hear her articulate that, because she knows that people think she's dumb, and she knows what it means to have somebody believe in her.
And she wrote another poem where she talked about an ugly unicorn.
And I said, "Who's the unicorn?" And she said, "Me." And I said, "Why do you think you're ugly?" And she said, "The other kids look at me funny." And she said, "I can't talk," which of course is heartbreaking.
And for a long time, Amelia was listening to the song "It's Not Easy Being Green" by Kermit the Frog on repeat.
It's not easy being green.
I asked her what she thought it was talking about, and she said being lonely. And I asked her if there was anything that I could do to help change that, to help her not feel that way, and she said friends. And that's been an ongoing request with her, is helping her trying to make friends or be in places where there are people that accept her.
When I first heard mention of the hill, I shared that with Maura, and she asked Amelia about it immediately.
And I asked, "Do you talk on the hill?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Do you have friends on the hill?" And she said, "Yes." And I asked, "Well, who are they?" And she said, "Fiona." And the funny thing is that like 3 years ago at school, I said, "Who's your best friend?" At school, trying to figure out, can we do a play date? Can we do something? And she said, "Fiona." And so I tried to find Fiona at school, and they couldn't find Fiona. And so we kind of dropped it. And this is like now 3 years later. And, now she's telling me this friend, Fiona, is her best friend. And I was like, oh, okay, so not at school, your best friend on the hill.
And I'd hedge the bet that these friendships are lifesavers. But if you're going through your life every day, not able to communicate with anyone, not even your own parents, you can understand why Gerald, who lives across from the park, may be reaching out telepathically, begging for help, because he feels so lonely and so trapped.
That's all kind of new for us, this influx of people coming for help and asking for her advice.
No 10-year-old should be saddled with the responsibility of saving people.
As her mom, I want to protect her and make sure that she's not facing any more challenges than she needs.
And yet, Amelia deeply believes it's her duty to help.
She typed, "People hoping I persist, people outpouring. I have a job to do."
I told Maura that I wished a wise adult could just, drop into the hill, make a list of all the people that need help, and then find a way to get all of those people on letterboards. It seemed like pure fantasy. And then I met a minister named Joe, who has a remarkable story to tell about just this.
I was a trial attorney for 25 years in New York before moving to Arizona, and became an associate pastor of adult education at Highlands Church. And we have one of the largest special needs ministries in the Phoenix Valley. I've been privileged to work with closely 4 of the non-speaking persons with autism.
Joe had to go through his own process of confirming both the legitimacy of spelling and the reality of spiritual gifts being shared by the non-speakers before he could believe either.
When the spellers first started communicating, especially on spiritual issues, my first reaction was way skeptical. And so I started looking at what was happening, and I almost instinctively kicked into trial lawyer mode. I'm trained in argumentation, how to think, how to analyze arguments. I looked early on and I saw that there were sources that were skeptical of spelling, and I actually looked into some of the academic papers on it. And what I found was the 40 or so negative papers were earlier on in the process. They were back in the 90s. Then at one point, the spellers improved their methodology.
When facilitated communication evolved into newer, more independent methods like pointing to a letterboard or pointing a pencil through a stencil letter or typing independently on an iPad or a talker.
You find later on there's like over 100 papers that are now saying, wait a minute, we missed something here. And they're at respected places. There was a recent study out of the University of Virginia where somebody even said, let's track eye movements and hand movements and see what happens first. And what they found is the eye went first to the letter, then the finger followed the eye. So I think those old notions that spelling is kind of phony or fake, those are being dispelled. And I have no doubt whatsoever that the information I'm getting is coming from the spellers. It's their own thoughts. The spelling facilitators working with them do not ask leading questions.
I really dislike that we always need to validate that the non-speaker's words are their own. But there it is again. We can trust their words. So when the conversation with the non-speakers at Joe's church started to breach things that were seemingly impossible, Joe believed them. And Joe is very close to one of his spellers named Cody. And the other day, Cody was on a Zoom call with another speller named Josiah who lived in Minnesota.
It was the first time they met. The connection between them is just amazing. It's like they know each other. They're commenting on gifts about each other. And Josiah made this interesting reference, come and join us on the hill sometime. And now the rest of us in the room are looking at each other. Join us on the hill.
Joe had clearly never heard of the hill. And as he's telling me the story, I can tell that he had no idea that I had.
It's like, okay, what's going on here? So today we asked Cody, do you know what Josiah meant about the hill? Yes. It's a place where people with autism were able to gather and we can visit there with others with autism. It's a time they're not encumbered by their bodies. Somehow he knew exactly what Josiah was talking about. Cody added further, the spelling facilitator he works with, he said, she's seen the hill. When we looked at the spelling facilitator, and she had tears forming in her eyes, and the spelling facilitator was saying, all I can tell you is there was this perfect peace and joy. It was like I never wanted to leave. And that seems to be the common theme.
So the woman that was the spelling facilitator, she was just like neurotypical, right? She's just like you and me, and she was able
She's
to go to the hill?
neurotypical. She went to the hill in a dream, and it only happened one time. And when I asked her more about it later, there were children there. And we asked Cody, why do you think she was able to go to the hill? And he explained the children that she saw there had autism. She's prayed to go back and it hasn't happened. She thinks she got a glimpse of it to help her tune her heart more to the people with autism to understand what they're referring to.
So it seems as though some neurotypical people can access the hill.
She's one of the most gentle, humble, sweetest people I've ever met.
I've learned from the non-speakers that they're much more likely to let someone into their gifts and knowledge if they have pure intentions and a good heart.
I think that curiosity with the spiritual savant is a lot of those skill sets are skill sets that people don't even really think about. What's beautiful is that the kids have the capacity to open us up to experience their telepathy, to experience their bilocation, their healing ability.
I started approaching like a trial attorney. I said, if these were witnesses I was cross-examining, what would I be looking for? The first most obvious question is simply whether someone is telling the truth.
Joe took me through a big list of questions that lawyers typically ask to figure out if someone is telling the truth.
They do not want attention. They're not incentivized by money. I researched hallucinations as well. Hallucinations are not shared events.
Meaning thousands of non-speakers would not be hallucinating about telepathy or going to the hill or seeing ghosts or talking to God. And so many say all of those things.
Hallucinations are usually caused by something like a tumor or a biochemical imbalance or something like that.
Joe's process of determining honesty and truthfulness was epic, and it literally took him about 20 minutes to explain all the ways he examined the validity of what his spellers were saying about their unbelievable abilities.
The bottom lines, I discovered these are among the most honest people you will ever meet. It's well documented that people with significant autism have great difficulty lying. And what seems to be impossible for them is to perpetuate a lie and build on it and keep going.
And Katie, Houston's mom, once told me, it takes so much effort and motor planning to get one sentence out. They're just not going to do that for a lie.
Two that I've seen prominent in our spellers, I would say, would be prophecy and a word of knowledge.
You mentioned the young woman that you said can often like see something going on the other side of the world. What are some of the things that she's seen?
She'll see a war, or she'll see this terrible destruction coming to a city or something like that. And, as you know now, our spellers can become easily dysregulated by emotion, especially intense emotion. My mind wants to know details. Where, when? Should I rebalance my IRA before, I know it's upsetting to her, and I don't want her to become dysregulated. She'll have to stand up and walk, but she'll see like catastrophes and things happening.
Have you ever been privy to something that she's seen that has come true? Or
Oh, yes. I mean, this was very interesting. She kept warning her father, be careful, you're going to slip on ice and fall and have a bad injury. And she says, you're going to hurt your hip. And we don't get much ice here in the Phoenix Valley. So that's one of the nice things about living here. Well, he got sent on a business trip, and he was outside his hotel, missed a patch of dark ice, went down, and he texted me from a hospital saying, Joe, you're not going to believe this. I fell on ice. I have pins being put in my... He sent me some of the pictures on his phone of the x-rays. And he said, I don't know what to say. I'm astonished. She has this gift. She sees these things.
So, in a way similar to Amelia, this young woman was seeing and hearing things that can feel traumatizing. And at one point in Amelia's journey, she was really struggling and shutting down a lot. And she more or less stopped spelling. And I connected Maura with Katie and Houston down in Atlanta, thinking that maybe they could help.
We went to see one of the therapists that Houston had seen to help with that body control. And so we went down to Atlanta. We did an intensive week with this doctor, and we got to spend some time with Katie and Houston.
When I heard this trip was happening, I was thrilled. This was the first family that Maura had ever met that could validate and share her experience around telepathy.
So when we were visiting Houston and Katie in Atlanta, we were able to ask Amelia questions and have Houston type the answers for her, because he was so much more fluent. He was so much more further along in his connecting his brain and his body and in his fluency. We'd ask her a question and he would type an answer for her as they spoke telepathically.
Oh my gosh, did it work?
So Houston was able to give us some insights into some things that Amelia liked, because she wasn't able to effectively type all these thoughts out at that point. So let me see. I know I wrote it all down. She wants chocolate milk for breakfast, loves chocolate milk. We didn't know that. Cheese hurts her stomach, but she loves it. She can read sheet music. She has perfect pitch, which I had no idea. She can speak many other languages, but picked English. She said school is too easy. Her angel is Cleopatra. She came to take her to meet God. She wants me to know how much she loves God's house.
I paused to ask more about this. So she brings up God a lot. And what's interesting to me is, I mean, you aren't particularly religious, right? I mean, I remember you saying like you rarely go to church, like not even on Christmas most of the time.
I know that there are other families that are, you can make the argument that, well, if they're reading your mind and you're really religious, then they're probably picking up on that. But that's not the case with our family. And it just hadn't been a part of our family. Amelia was baptized. We went to church on those times. We still don't even go on Christmas or holidays a lot of times. So she wasn't getting us from us. And that is so telling to me that she is so strongly connected with God And that's on her own. That's coming from her.
Houston's approach with Amelia is both effective and heartwarming. And of course, it raises the question, if more of us could tap into telepathy, how much could we benefit the spellers? And in episode 5, we've learned that it's actually pretty common for teachers and therapists to develop telepathic abilities with their non-speaking students to help them learn, but also to help keep them safe. But that connection goes even deeper. In episode 5, you also met a teacher named Jess. And 30 years ago, a first grader named Asher entered her class. He created some telepathic mischief, but also helped loop Jess into the telepathic communication that was happening between students. They formed a lifelong bond. And what she's experienced with Asher not only validates everything we've heard thus far, but also gives us more insight into maybe explaining it. The new paradigm idea that maybe consciousness is the base of everything. Asher affirms that.
Asher lost his mum when he was 9, and I'd become very friendly with his mum. And a day or two before she died, she asked to see me, and I went into the hospice, and she said, "You've got such a good relationship with Asher. Can I ask you, even after he's left your class, even after he's left your school, to stay in touch with him and be a friend to him and be a kind of mentor?" So I said, "Well, yeah, absolutely. I'll just be a lifetime friend to him." I was happy to do that. I ended up spending quite a lot of time with him outside of school, and every few weeks we go off on a train ride together. That's when we really started talking to each other, because we had these long journeys. That's when I started to pick up on the spiritual stuff that he was sharing with me, all the really amazing things he just seemed to pick up out of the ether.
Asher has autism but was verbal.
He had a good vocabulary.
What were some of the messages he was sharing with you or things he was explaining to you?
Sometimes he'd have visions, he'd see things happening in the future. And there was one occasion that really blew my mind when I was desperately trying to keep up with him because he was talking about stuff that was so metaphysical and so advanced. I was reading all these books on esoteric subjects to try and keep abreast of his ideas. And there was one book, and it was completely beyond my comprehension. And I was only partway through the book. And he said, "Have you got it with you?" And I said, "Yeah." And so he said, "Just put it out flat on the palm of your hand." And so I did. And he laid his hand on top of it for a few seconds. And then he just gave me a complete summary of what I'd read up to that point and what the rest of the book was about. Very concise, very clear, just the basics of it. And I said, "Do you do that with all books?" And he said, "Yeah."
Wow.
I know.
And he was talking to you at this point. So this was still, he was using his
He was
words.
still using words. He carried on using words right up into his 20s.
Just to back up, because you're right, that is so astounding. It's like you have to take a minute to take it in. So he could put his hand on a book and basically absorb all the information in the book.
Yeah. Wow. And that's what he now does when he moves out of body and goes to what he calls the realms, this sort of psychological landscape, if you like, that he contacts me from.
To me, this realm sounds like the foundational consciousness that we talked about in the last episode, this field of information where all knowledge and creation is sourced.
And I can ask him a question on anything. What is consciousness? Or tell me about reincarnation or whatever. And he says it's like a huge library. He feels guided to a specific bit of the library. And he said, I can just absorb the information I need to answer your question.
Holy cow. That's unbelievable. What has he said about consciousness?
He says that consciousness obviously precedes and proceeds on, and that the Earth experience, the 3D body, is a temporary part of consciousness, and we're basically building up huge amounts of information. Every new thought we have, every new idea we have is new information, and that way we're expanding the cosmos, because each new piece of information that we come up with then goes into this library of his and becomes available for everybody else. But we have to get this knowledge through direct experience in 3D life.
Does he have a foot like in this realm of consciousness all the time?
He doesn't have complete access to it because he's still got a physical body. Some of the stuff that the non-speakers know and are aware of is so mind-blowing that there's going to be a lot of people who just go, whoa, I can't take that. That's just beyond my ken.
So can you share when you finally developed the telepathic link with Asher that you have now?
In his 20s, he went more and more monosyllabic. And he says that during that time, he was trying to reach me telepathically. And I would pick things up from time to time. And I would always say to myself, yeah, wishful thinking. I'm just imagining that's what I'd like him to say and all the rest of it. And then one day, I was feeling really low. It was the middle of winter. And I sat down at my computer and I just typed all my feelings, my frustration, the way I wanted to be back in contact. I knew he had more to tell me. I knew there was more to come. And that was the first time I got this message that came through completely clearly to me. Feel into my heart.
So you received a very clear telepathic message from Asher saying, feel into my heart.
Yes, so I put the computer aside and I sat there and I went as deep as I could and concentrated on Asher's heart. And I saw this image of it was like a sort of monk's cell, if you imagine, sort of in the Middle Ages. And it was this stone building with one little window up high in the wall. And there was a table there. And there was an old-fashioned pen, one of those ones you have to dip into the ink, and there was an ink bottle next to it, and the ink bottle was empty. And I got this whoosh of feeling inside me saying, I need you to give me the ink for my pen. And I interpreted that as, you need me to write the thoughts that you're sending to me. And that was my breakthrough moment. Ky, that was the minute that I just thought, yeah, okay, this is for real.
When you got that vision of the priest cell, were you asleep? Were you meditating?
I was fully awake, but I was consciously emptying my mind of all the clutter. And I suppose that's what I learned to do with him regularly now. Yeah. Taking away all the expectations and all the thoughts about what might happen and what he might say, just emptying my mind as far as I possibly can, but staying alert and staying ready. And I always have a pen and notebook so I can write down my questions to him and his answers to me. And I've got stacks and stacks of these notebooks now. I think I'm on number 15, something like that.
But how do you know it's Asher communicating with you telepathically and not just your own thoughts? Have you ever been able to kind of like prove something that he conveyed telepathically?
Telepathically asked him about a member of his family who I'd lost touch with years ago. And telepathically, he told me quite a strange thing that surprised me. I went onto Facebook and tried to find this person's profile. And sure enough, exactly what he'd said was there on the screen. And I thought, yeah, it really is Asher I'm picking up here.
I asked her for a few more examples of tangible proof.
Occasionally he'll say something and it'll be a word that I've not even heard of. And that's quite good because then I have to look the word up and it's exactly the right word for what we're talking about.
Like one time she telepathically told Asher that her friend was having these horrible headaches and he sent her a word
that sounded like myelin. And I don't know what myelin means.
So then he sent her an image.
Because he doesn't always just send words. And it was like electrical wiring that's sort of in those plastic cases. And the case was all scuffed and messed up and you could see the copper wire through it.
So she typed myelin into her phone.
I got something called a myelin sheath, which is apparently the casing of nerves in the brain that stops them all shorting and banging into each other, and they're casing very much like electrical wiring, which I knew nothing about. I have no background in human biology at all.
Wow.
Telling me that was the problem. So yeah, when I get stuff like that, I think, well, that couldn't have come from me because I've never heard of this thing.
It seems impossible, I know, but I've heard variations of this story now from dozens of people, including teachers Casey, Susie, Marianne that you met in episode 5. But this last thing here, where Asher was able to diagnose her friend, gives a small insight of the potential of non-speakers.
I've seen kids who had family members who were diagnosed with cancer that started working with them energetically, only to have those issues go into remission or be cleared. They've said repeatedly, we're the new science, we're the new medicine, the new education, the new technology, and even the new currency, which they call the currency of love.
I mean, honestly, Susie, if I had $1 million, I'd want to open a healing and education center where non-speakers could work with the best minds in science and math and, healthcare. So they could, heal the planet and people and relationships and animals. My mom is having all these issues with her back and knees, and she just got a CAT scan and MRI, and no one can tell her what's actually going on. And I mean, if someone like Asher could just scan her body and give her a diagnosis, it would save people so much pain and effort and money every year.
And I don't know of any person on the planet that doesn't want to contribute all that they came here to be. And this population is no different in regards to that.
From what I have seen, the non-speakers can absolutely tap into these spiritual gifts and use them to deeply impact and change and heal our world. But to believe that, we have to be open to the idea of a paradigm shift. And paradigm shifts have happened before. In fact, Maura summed this up so well.
So a long time ago, people thought the earth was flat, and then it wasn't. It's round. And it was a real shift in people's understanding of something that was so real to them. And that's what I think this is like. And as far as telepathy goes, I'm telling you, the earth is not flat.
And so back to Amelia, just 10 years old and working to navigate this world and wishing she could be seen for her incredible abilities, not disabilities.
Amelia definitely has big plans for when she gets older. She wants to be a genetics doctor. She knows the challenges that a lot of kids are going through being nonverbal, and she wants to help them.
And knowing Amelia and her parents who love and support her beyond words, she could end up being the best genetics doctor the world has ever seen. Amelia, just like so many of these kids, have the gifts and talents and knowledge and seemingly the access to even more knowledge. Now it's on us to help them. And there's something enormous standing in their way.
A lot of families have their school districts telling them no, they can't work with them using spelling. We actively have people working against it, saying that their typing is not an acceptable form of communication.
For the life of me, I can't understand the pushback and the resistance to doing this. I get angry.
She wants to go to Harvard or UW-Madison. She also said that she wants to help ailing libraries. She's just a very kind, thoughtful kid. And Amelia's going to change the world, as are all these other kids too.
In the next episode, we'll explore why spelling has become so controversial and what we can all do to help. And we'll head to England to meet Kyle and his mom, Caroline, who only communicate via telepathy, often through their dreams. And though Kyle can't speak, he can write and perform music with ease. And this challenges the spelling critics and naysayers who defend their stance because they don't think non-speakers are competent. Well, you can't write or play music if you're not competent. You'll hear more of Kyle's amazing music when we're back in 2 weeks with episode 8. And just a reminder, for the last 3 episodes, there will be a 2-week wait between each one. Thank you to my amazing collaborators. Original music was created by Elizabeth P.W., original logo and cover art by Ben Kendor Design, the audio mix and finishing by Sarah Ma, our amazing podcast coordinator, Jill Pachesnik, the Telepathy Tapes coordinator and my right hand, Catherine Ellis, and I'm Ky Dickens, your writer, creator, and host. Thank you again for joining us. Remember that you can review some of the tests and see some of the film recordings on our website, thetelepathytapes.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and join us next week as this world expands and deepens.